Passionate. It's a favourite word of job adverts. Looking for a passionate, energetic individual. We see it a lot. And therefore, I also see it a lot in CVs and cover letters, because we think if they ask for it, we need to say it. But what does passionate mean? I've met many people who say they're it, but don't come across as passionate or even enthusiastic. You need to demonstrate it. Show, don't just tell. I'm David Spencer, and this is the Media Mentor podcast. Over the last 20 years, I've been helping people advance their careers through practical advice and support. This podcast is where I share that advice, hear from people I've helped on their journey, and speak to colleagues and industry figures about media and the often baffling world of recruitment. On this episode, you'll hear from Matthew Dunne-Miles, who first came to me in the autumn of 2020 with not quite an existential crisis, but wanting to get his journalism and media career back on track. He was getting nowhere with applications, despite some really good experience and running his own podcast. Within months, he'd moved into podcasting and is currently leading production for The Laundry, the podcast connecting financial crime to the real world. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. We originally spoke and you first got in touch late 2020, I believe. So height of the pandemic, and I think in a point where you might have been in a tear, I might have been in a tear. That's bringing back traumatic memories for lots of people, I think, if we start talking about that.
Yes. Yeah, I think I was in tier 2 at the time. I'd recently moved to Brighton. So I was very smug for all of about 6 weeks before the national lockdown kicked in, and then no one was going anywhere.
Just take me back, if you can, to remember so much going on back then for everyone. But what was your mindset and what was your situation? Why did you get in touch?
I think at that point, I had just turned 30. So I was kind of in a place where you're thinking about your career and what you want from your job. And so I'd originally been in journalism. So I'd worked in journalism for kind of 2.5 years, moved to London, ended up working in a PR role, and which I kind of initially saw as maybe temporary, probably due to the pandemic and other reasons, and getting comfortable in a role. I was there for maybe 3.5, 4 years. And I knew that I wanted to get back towards something more editorial. That was a real big aim for me. And I knew that I had to do it soon. I couldn't just stay comfortable in this role I was in. I'd seen the stuff he'd put online and thought maybe you could help me in terms of getting me out of this rut and into something else that I wanted to be more in.
And of course, one of the challenges is if you're in a job hunting is in a way even more exhausting because you're doing a day job and then trying to find the daylight elsewhere to be looking for work and kind of do that job hunting.
Absolutely. It didn't feel like you had the time to do it. And then the time you did was all your weekends. So everything became focused on either the job you weren't completely happy in or trying to get out of the job you weren't completely happy in. And that becomes all consuming. So that becomes really, really difficult. And that was the kind of thing where I needed a fresh look at my kind of mindset. And I think that's why I kind of got in touch. Was I'd been applying for stuff, I hadn't heard back. And because you'd kind of given up your whole Saturday and Sunday and then you're back into the job you didn't want to be in, that becomes a really kind of grinding process and really difficult to keep yourself motivated with that.
And were you worried that long in PR meant that you'd never get back to editorial journalism?
I was absolutely terrified of that. Yeah, I really was. And I think one of the things about moving into PR was that journalism cachet of having some experiences in newsroom, which I did, is really valuable in the PR world. But trying to get that switch back, the PR stuff isn't as valuable on the other side. So I had been working it was a very reputable PR agency. The news kind of values of it were really strong. And actually, I think there's a lot about that it taught me in terms of having good instincts on ideas and trying to get ideas through as a PR. It's a lot harder than kind of pitching your editor. You've got to do it with the company's whole mindset in mind, and it's got to be good enough to get through those editorial values. So, that gave me some sort of strength in terms of knowing my ideas were strong or whatever. So that was good. But I think by the time I got in touch with you, I'd done a few freelance pieces, but I was they was kind of when I had the time more than kind of getting into it full time. And I really, really wanted to get into this podcast space, which was something I was super passionate about. I was running my own kind of podcast as a passion project, again, taking up the time that I had in the evenings and on weekends. But I wanted that to be more than that. I wanted that to be something I could kind of use to make a living, essentially.
A couple of things there. People that speak to me know that the P word is something I get a little bit irritated about on CVs and cover letters when people say they're passionate about something and don't necessarily tell you how that manifests itself. But exactly that, if you're doing something that proves you're passionate, that podcast, whatever you're doing on the side, is a great way to demonstrate that, and actually gives you some of the air miles that may well have taught you stuff that move you through the phase that you've achieved. On the PR thing, did you think that actually there was no value in the skills and the experience you were having? And did you then think, well, actually, there are things I can turn around to be positives when talking to potential employers and clients for podcasting, say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a point where I thought, well, where do I take this and how can this be moved into another area? And it kind of quickly became something where I realized that the skills you use there, which was still writing every day, which was still thinking of ideas, thinking editorially, being plugged into the news, is stuff that, you know, I'm still using now. And actually the kind of podcast roles that I eventually got both stemmed as much from the PR work as they did from the editorial stuff, because they were adjacent fields to stuff that I'd been covering with the PR. So then it kind of became that link in. That was the kind of way in. And then I also had this podcast experience. So I could go, I know the kind of expertise area. I have this podcast skill. I can match those up and do that for you. So that was the real kind of thing I had to kind of switch in my brain, was go, no, this does have some value and it can be used elsewhere.
Yeah, it's not the light years away that might be the perception that some people in it can think. And I have conversations with people looking to move into PR from journalism, which, as you mentioned, might seem more obvious, but it isn't actually as easy as some people might think. There's a lot more to it. But also comms roles are hugely variable. There are lots of different things that people can be doing in comms that are perhaps more creative. Tell me, what was it that when you got in touch that sort of baffled you, confused you, frustrated you the most? CV, cover letter, or just the whole process?
I mean, I know that you sent me the kind of cover letter template that you use, and that was really, really helpful. I think before that, I'd been kind of putting my heart and soul into every cover letter and trying to make it extra personal. And I was not seeing any results for that. So again, the emotional and creative that you put into actually making it work, well, you weren't getting any results. Whereas you went, no, you can follow this template and still do all the stuff you need to do. But actually, that's the kind of thing that once you have that structure in your head, it makes it a lot faster. So that was really, really helpful, I found. I think I'd done about 2 or 3 cover letters in my life. Before that, I'd managed to get work straight away on my first job out of university, and then was freelance for a while. And then, just kind of got into the other role, the PR role, through a recommendation from a friend. So it was straight into the interview. So cover letters and that whole going in cold felt like something I was really struggling with. So that the cover letter template you sent was really, really helpful. And I still use that today.
And it's just a way of framing what you need to say in the way that you need to say it and the order you need to say it. In terms of unlocking what you're in, then you're in a job, you've got the exhausting part of the process of looking for work, that daylight, you're doing a podcast as well. So we know how intense that can feel. And you know, as we say all the time about job hunting and applications, exhausting and demoralizing if you're not hearing anything. What was the process then? We chatted about some of the things you could work on, that cover letter. What did you then look to do to try and help release that valve, if that's the right expression?
Yeah, I think there became a breaking point where I thought, if I had an extra day to give to not only the search, but doing some more freelance journalism stuff on the side, this would really open stuff up for me. So I think probably a couple of months after we spoke is when I spoke to my employer at the time and said, I'd like to go down to 4 days. I've got this other stuff on that I'm really interested and passionate about. Sorry for using the passionate word again. They were fine with that. And so then I went down to 4 days, and then eventually the build-up of work became so much that I thought I was having to take annual leave from my job to cover doing stuff on the side. So then it really became a leap of faith. So I decided after that, okay, I think I can make enough money to cover myself from this if I go fully freelance or kind of give up the PR role. So that was the big plan. I was going to go fully into freelance journalism. I picked up some shifts with a local newspaper in London. I was pitching stuff, more kind of feature articles as well. So I was doing a mixture of news desk and features, back into that journalism mindset. And then a company I'd reached out to a few months before had offered I got in touch with them about a more junior role. And they'd said to me at the time, we think you'd be great for this, but you'd be bored within a week. And when you're desperate for a job, you don't want to hear that. You think, I'll do anything. I'll make the tea. I don't care what I have to do as long as you give me this job.
I'm happy if I'm bored within a week.
Exactly. So then they got back in touch and said, we've got something a bit more senior, which we think would be more suitable for you. And then that kind of started. And so then very quickly, after deciding to give up the old job and move into freelance, I was offered this new job, which was working for the Fintech Insider podcast. So my background was with the PR role was doing stuff for financial technology companies. This was kind of marrying those two skills. They ran a regular news section on fintech every week. So in 2 years, I think I did more than 200 podcasts for them, which was like a boot camp. It was amazing. It was kind of taking all those skills that I picked up elsewhere and really just kind of using them every day, which was fantastic.
The conversation, obviously, that I have with clients regularly is the skills that you have. It's about shaping them for the roles that you go for. But, whether that's the CV has got to say certain things, demonstrate the passion. We joked about it, but actually, say these things and be explicit about where you've used your skills and shown how you can actually do work well. But also it's about then saying it in a cover letter. Did you find that once you were sort of framing that cover letter correctly, that actually your conversations with people was also better? Because you talked about going for freelance work, which is a slightly different process in that you're kind of sending out speculative stuff, but it's important how your mindset is. And we talk about that a lot. It's not just what's on paper, but how you feel about that experience and feel about how you're talking about yourself.
Yeah, and that mindset bit was the bit that was probably the most important. I think obviously I needed to finesse the cover letter and the CV, but I remember having the conversation with you and saying, is this journalism experience, is this redundant now? Have I kind of lost that? Is this so far in the past that I can never use it again? And I think because you were, this outside voice saying, no, you can, reframe this, you can use this, there's still some good stuff in there. It was the kind of thing you need then that you can take forward. So that was the big thing for me, was just, like you say, reframing your mindset as much as it was kind of getting everything out on paper. It did make those conversations a lot easier. And I remember the first kind of freelance role I went in with my journalism experience very much to the forefront, kind of saying, I can do great content stuff for you. I can do some video stuff. I can do some audio stuff. And for them, that didn't seem like, that was a million years ago. You can't do that anymore. And that was because I think I presented it in the right way. That was really important.
And again, this is something that is worth repeating, but what can seem like light years ago when you're younger is not really in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, when you're 22, 23, 3 or 4 years ago is a long time because it's a large proportion of your life. And it's the same if you're turning 30 like you were, but you definitely put that in one of your contact emails. I'm turning 30. It's not a life crisis moment, but this is a point where I need something to happen, which is we use whatever spark, whatever moment to do that. In terms of technical tips, I know that when we spoke, sort of CV was quite linear and sort of traditional in format in terms of being like a Word document, essentially. And you discovered the world of Canva, which I do recommend to people. Other programs like that, I'm sure, exist, but it is useful to see how you can maximize a page. Because again, one of your questions was, is a 2-page CV a cardinal sin? And I said, well, it's not going to be it's not going to break the possible deal, but it is best to try and get things onto one page. Recruiters are like a 1-page CV.
I think you said as well that 1.5 is worse, which is where I kind of was at that point. So
yes, definitely.
But after that, I think Canva kind of really did change things in terms of that space. You had these templates that you could use, and they would use that space for you and make something that looked eye-catching and interesting. And obviously you do want your experience to speak for itself, but occasionally you just want to make sure that you do present that in the best way possible, put your best foot forward. So yeah, for me, that was really helpful in terms of, okay, how do I change something that's super linear into something that is compact, but also the most information I can get across.
And Matthew, it's fantastic to talk to you because, as I say to everyone, it makes me very proud when I speak to people and that they develop and do work in the thing that they are passionate about. You know, we'll stop joking about the passionate word, but it's absolutely fine when you demonstrate it. But it really does make me feel very happy that you moved into something that gives back that reward and that you wanted to do. When you look back, is there any kind of thing you go as advice to others that you'd pass on as one of your key learnings?
I think if you can let time allow it, do the thing you want to do for yourself, even just to learn the ropes. That was the biggest thing for me. I had the podcast I was doing, which is all about Louis Theroux documentaries. Not going to get me a job unless maybe Louis Theroux reached out. But the whole point of that was to learn the process, to learn how to do it, to learn about kind of the nuts and bolts of something. So when I went into the interview with a podcast producer, my first boss, Laura, she knew that I kind of knew something. And actually, when I got into the working full time, the stuff that I'd kind of figured out on my own wasn't a million miles away from what they were doing internally, because there's certain processes that just make sense. So that was the big thing for me, was working out, okay, do it for yourself. See if you can do this and have a play around with it. And then you've got something to show for yourself instead of going, I'd love to be in that space, but I can't. I can tell you that I can do it, but I've got nothing to kind of give you evidence of that. That was the big thing for me, really.
And things as simple as, you know, obviously the editing, the production process, but if you published a podcast, if you've pushed it out through socials to create video to get attention for a podcast, all of those things are valuable for a role and things that you can do yourself so easily these days. So that's why if people say they're passionate and then they're not doing something like that, that's why even an employer will go, well, are you really? Because where's the evidence of that?
Yeah, I think that is important. And it was all those skills, like you say, learning to promote it. And also that was, funnily enough, it was the kind of stuff I'd learned with the PR as well, where I knew how to maybe get some attention. So we managed to, with the podcast, my own podcast, we ended up in the NME, we ended up on the Great British Podcast List, their newsletter. We ended up in having been featured in the Sunday Times. That was all the PR stuff that I'd learned in my role, which I then could use to kind of build up the podcast stuff. So that was, using skills from elsewhere to get the best out of what you can was the idea.
Matthew, fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for being one of the early guests on my podcast. I'm glad you're enjoying the work, and keep up that great work on all the podcasting. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experience with us.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you again for being a amazing mentor and giving me that kind of perspective that I really needed at a time when, just turned 30. Things were all over the place.
Just turning 30 and things all over the place. Well, I think a lot of us know exactly what that feels like. And for those yet to reach that milestone, get ready. Thank you to Matthew for making some excellent points, whether it's to maximize transferable skills, demonstrating passion, or making sure that previous work is not written off because you think too much time has passed. All valuable insights to take into the job application process. If you want help with your cover letters like Matthew did, then get in touch via themediamentor.info. That template has been adapted over time, but can prove very useful. I do online sessions of 30 minutes or an hour with lower prices for students and recent graduates. There's also interview prep, evaluation of show reels and demos, and I offer voice coaching and training sessions on news writing. Remember to keep an eye on the website for jobs across all sectors that we cover in media, and there's that WhatsApp channel where all the new jobs get shared as they drop. You'll find the link for that at the top of my web pages at mediamentor.info. Thank you again to Matthew for giving me his time and sharing his insight. Also to Mrs. Mentor, as always, for the tireless work keeping the feed going and the website refreshed. And thank you for listening. Remember to click follow on your podcast player to keep up to date with the latest episodes, and write a review too if you love what you hear.